Rejoice, heavenly powers, sing choirs of angels. O universe, dance around God's throne. Jesus Christ, our King, is risen. Sound the victorious trumpet of salvation. Rejoice, earth in glory, revealing the splendor of your creation, radiant in the brightness of your triumphant King. Christ has conquered, now his life and glory fill you. Darkness vanishes forever. Rejoice, O Mother Church, exalting glory. The risen Savior, our Lord of life, shines upon you. Let all God's people sing and shout for joy.
From the Gospel of John, chapter 20, verses 1 to 18. Early on the first day of the week, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene came to the tomb and saw that the stone had been removed from the tomb. So she ran and went to Simon Peter and the other disciple, the one whom Jesus loved, and said to them, "They've taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we do not know where they have laid him." Then Peter and the other disciple set out and went towards the tomb. The two were running together, but the other disciple outran Peter and reached the tomb first. He bent down to look in and saw the linen wrappings lying there, but he did not go in. Then Simon Peter came, following him, and went into the tomb. He saw the linen wrappings lying there and the cloth that had been on Jesus' head, not lying with the linen wrappings, but rolled up in a place by itself. Then the other disciple, who reached the tomb first, also went in, and he saw and believed. For as yet they did not understand the scripture, that he must rise from the dead. Then the disciples returned to their homes. But Mary stood weeping outside the tomb. As she wept, she bent over to look into the tomb, and she saw two angels in white, sitting where the body of Jesus had been lying, one at the head and the other at the feet. They said to her, "Woman, why are you weeping?" She said to them, "They have taken away my Lord, and I do not know where they have laid him." When she had said this, she turned round and saw Jesus standing there, but she did not know that it was Jesus. Jesus said to her, "Woman, why are you weeping? For whom are you looking?" Supposing him to be the gardener, she said to him, "Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have laid him, and I will take him away." Jesus said to her, "Mary." She turned and said to him in Hebrew, "Rabboni," which means teacher. Jesus said to her, "Do not hold on to me, because I have not yet ascended to the Father. But go to my brothers and say to them, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God." And Mary Magdalene went and announced to the disciples, "I have seen the Lord." And she told them that he had said these things to her.
Most blessed of all gods, evil and hatred are put to flight, and sin is washed away. Lost that this Easter candle may make our darkness light. For Christ the morning star has risen in glory. Christ is risen from the dead, and his flame of love still burns within us. Christ sheds his peaceful light on all the world. Christ lives and reigns forever and ever. Amen.
I've heard a lot of people in the last month say the pandemic has changed everything. For many, it's turned the world upside down. I was talking with a friend with ME who said it's like the whole world has chronic fatigue syndrome and has to be in the house 23 hours a day. Now you all know what it's like. And again, a neurodiverse person said, I find touch difficult and I like to crochet through meetings. And these Zoom platforms are great because I get to meet people on my own terms and they can't see me crocheting. Finally, the world's set up for the benefit of an autistic person like me. So we've been experiencing a change in the balance of power. And some of the people in charge feel disabled, and some of the disadvantaged feel, at last, there's a place for us. While for many people, there's been a profound change. For some, catastrophic, for others, healthy. One thing that seems universal is that this season has intensified existing traits in our characters. The impatient have become more impatient. The lazy have got lazier, the hyperactive have gone off the scale, the indecisive have put things off even longer. More precisely, the most poignant parts of life have grown even more significant. These weeks of confinement have become a microcosm of our whole lives, and all the unresolved questions and wonderings have come into sharper focus. It's an uncomfortable experience, but it could be the most important gift of this troubled time. The questions about the virus, why is it here? What do we do about it? How do we balance public good with our own needs? How do we survive? What do we owe one another? How can we flourish? They're intensified versions of life's big questions. The way we tell the story of the virus is the way we tell the story of everything. I want to suggest there's two ways we can tell the story of the virus and of everything. I want now to explore each of them with you in some detail. Here's story one. The universe began with a big bang. It took a few billion years for things to settle down. The real bang crash was still going on zillions of light years away, but by a strange collection of circumstances, one planet in a minor galaxy developed the conditions for life to begin. A principle emerged called the survival of the fittest, and in a ruthless and brutal sequence of visceral contests, those forms of life gradually became more sophisticated until they started to develop self-consciousness. Once they'd done that, they started to plan, refine, reflect, and make meaning. But such meaning as they made had no larger purpose. It was simply their attempt to recognize and value those features of their existence that rose above their raw animal condition, in which shelter, food, clothing, company, reproduction, and death set the template for life. Unsatisfied with the mundanity of things, and overwhelmed by the paradox that while individual life ends, life in general continues, these self-conscious beings started to put their existence in the context of something greater, richer, deeper, and more enduring. They talked of a life force that lay above and beyond the earth and their existence. They sought ways to communicate with this life force and discern its purpose. But these were, in the end, sad, doomed and tragic ways of failing to come to terms with their accidental, purposeless lives. In truth, the only value they reliably found in the years that came between birth and death was the sense of achievement in asserting themselves over one another, and the sense of belonging they felt when they knew they were appreciated, desired, or understood. Everything else in life was a conspiracy of busyness, designed to keep hearts and minds so preoccupied with small battles, easy comforts, and manageable projects, that they would never reflect in despair at the pointlessness or meaninglessness of it all. That's what I call story one. The virus has been devastating for those who have become very ill, terrifying for all who are most at risk, and disastrous for the many whose livelihoods have been ripped away from them almost overnight. But what I sense has been most deeply troubling about the pandemic is that it's laid bare story one in the rawness of its struggle for survival and the emptiness of its attempts to rise above that struggle and make meaning and purpose. The busyness and urgency and all the paraphernalia of a full and active life have been stripped away, and there's now no shield from the uncompromising necessities of survival and the unrelenting approach of death. I say that with no schadenfreude, no sense of taking pleasure in another's misery, because we all know story one very well and spend large parts of our lives in it. When we panic, feel the weight of anxiety closing in, sense despair or depression in our bones, story one seems to be the only story. That's not the pathology of a few, that's a regular reality for everyone. But I want to suggest a different way of telling the story. It starts in a different place and it finishes in a different place. Story two goes like this. There's something called essence. It's outside, beyond, and largely incomprehensible to existence. It's made up of three persons in utter, devoted, and dynamic relation to one another. It dwells in forever, eternity, beyond time and space. It chose to create time, space, matter, shape, life, energy, consciousness, what together we call existence. It did so not as an experiment, a game, a challenge, or a breeze, but for one reason only, because it desired to be in relationship with something, someone, outside itself. It created the universe from one explosive start and waited till all the constituents for life had come into focus. Since its outside time, the odd 14 billion years were but as a day. Once human beings had taken shape, relationship began to take on a different dimension. The Trinity, as we call the three persons, began to interact with human consciousness. Eventually it settled upon one people, Israel, with whom to be in covenant relationship. But the whole purpose of the story was that the Trinity could become known and be in relationship with humanity and the creation in person. In the fullness of time, this happened. Honouring the covenant, one person of the Trinity took human flesh as a member of the people of Israel. This fulfilled all the hopes of Israel and the whole design of the Trinity. That person brought the entirety of humanity face to face with God and the entirety of God face to face with humanity. Yet the virus that had beset humanity from the beginning, the fatal flaw that poisoned existence, dismantling trust and distorting love, got to this relationship too. Humanity rejected the utter human, utter God, and killed him in the most gruesome manner imaginable, the way it disposed of slaves, as a fearsome example to others who might rebel. And this is the crucial moment in the story. At this point, the Trinity might have abandoned the relationship. Humanity was flawed, its allergic reaction had rejected the purpose of its existence. It had chosen story one. Despite all its despair, depression, and denial in the face of story one, when offered story two, it had turned it down as comprehensively as possible. And see, if the Trinity had left it there, there would be nothing at all to stand against those who said that speculation and exploration of transcendence and meaning was just a tragic failure to come to terms with the limitations of existence, and in the end, sadder than the cynicism of mechanistic determinism. But the Trinity didn't leave it there. The Trinity kept the story going, kept the relationship going. The Trinity not only restored the second person to existence, but when that second person, Jesus, had restored relationships with those who'd panicked and fled, the third person, whom we call the Spirit, came to shape all people in the ways Jesus had offered. And when existence finally comes to an end, not just for each one of us, but for all things, Jesus will be there again at the threshold of time and eternity, when our consciousness will be suffused by essence, and with the Trinity, we will finally be taken into the wonder of forever. That's story 2. See how Easter is so crucial in this story. Christmas is fundamental, but Christmas was in the DNA of existence from its very inception. There could be no existence without essence, and essence resolved to be with us in Jesus. So there's no existence without Jesus. But Easter's different. Easter comes at the moment that the whole story of everything could be lost. Easter reveals God's utter commitment to be with us, however determined we are to reject the offer of love, the source of life, and the purpose of all things. Those who are convinced there's no reason to think beyond or outside story 1 would be perfectly justified if it weren't for Easter. For without Easter, God would be like a beautiful sail on a ship that was nonetheless headed for the rocks. It's Easter, not the coronavirus, that changes everything. It's Easter that shows God will never give up on us. It's Easter that demonstrates that this relationship, for which God created the universe and because of which Jesus died, is finally, ultimately, eternally unbreakable. The virus is a terrible thing, which has killed some, damaged many, and impoverished almost everybody. But most of all, what it's done is to lay bare the difference between story 1 and story 2. For story 1, the virus is an intense, bleak, and almost unbearable demonstration of what's finally true for us all, that we live short, troubled, and incomplete lives with no abiding value or purpose. For story 2, the virus is a truly scary example of what life could feel like if story 2 were not true. When Mary turns round from the tomb to the risen Lord, she turns from death to life, from grief to restored relationship, from despair to the one who will finally never let us go. She turns from story 1 to story 2. This Easter, let's do the same.